You shouldn't need a degree to understand your body or a decade in therapy to understand your mind. We have pieces of ourselves fragmented across many sources: dietitians, therapists, doctors. Our goal is to bring those pieces together. This is MycoMind, exploring how psychedelics, biology, and our consciousness connect. I'm Danielle Grubman, and this is the first episode of the MycoMind podcast, where we talk to researchers, creators, and explorers from around the world, helping us see our mind and body in new ways. Today I'm joined by Peterson Wagner, a fourth-year medical student at the University of Pennsylvania, and this year's Associate Director for Philadelic, the university's conference on the interdisciplinary frontiers of psychedelic studies, now entering its third year practicing. We're diving into how future psychiatrists are thinking about psychedelics, therapy, and the science of self-understanding. So without further ado,
if you can speak to me like I'm a 5-year-old, even though I know you've already told me before, what is the ultimate goal with Philadelic? Why have a forum talking about psychedelics of all things?
We've done Philadelic for the last 2 years as well, but this year it's all about policy, it's all about implementation, it's all about bringing together the people who will be most able to shift the needle on developing a roadmap for making a big difference in being able to use psychedelics to treat mental health issues. So the last 2 years, they've been very academic, they have been very objective. There's been a big focus on the transcendental aspects of psychedelics, some of the metaphysical implications, what it means for psychedelics in popular culture, spreading to reconsidering our views of ourselves and society. This year, we wanted to shift the focus a little bit just because it seems like we're at a little bit of an inflection point nationally about how close we are to being able to use psychedelics of whatever variety it might be to actually be treating patients scalably and effectively.
There's a lot to go over with that in particular, but part of this forum, you mentioned having a few different state senators and a bunch of other influential people within this space. What about them in particular? What kind of policies in particular are you guys looking to really zone in on to give people a better understanding of what it is that we know? Because what is it that we know? What do we want people to know?
I think two parts to that, right? There's what is it that we want the general public to know, and what is it that we want our lawmakers, our industry leaders, our insurance covers to know. For the general public, we want the general public to know that psychedelics are here. They're very effective. For the public who may be interested in taking these substances in order to help overcome problems in their lives, we want them to know that these substances are quite effective and that there are safe and effective ways to be able to use them to treat a whole host of pretty intractable diseases. For our legislators, for our insurance coverers, for our industry leaders, the message is similar, but we want to focus on more, okay, if we know that these substances are effective for treating a whole bevy of mental health disorders, is there a way that we can start using them in any particular model? Is there a roadmap that we can follow to deploy these substances effectively, at scale, affordably, safely? And the answer we think is yes.
I was just about to ask on that, because what if I'm part of this target demographic of people that actually does need psychedelics for my mental health care because I'm in a treatment-resistant case of depression or PTSD, something along those lines, and I'm still really skeptical of psychedelics though. So they could help me. There is a lot of benefits potentially, but I'm really nervous about that. Is there any room in this forum where you do talk about the risks or any kind of things like this?
Totally. A big part of this would come back to, so if I were to put on my clinician hat for a moment, I would have my follow-up question be, well, what does have you nervous about using psychedelics as a treatment? Because the answer is different depending on what things are foremost in patients' minds, right? If patients have only heard about psychedelics as dangerous drugs with abuse potential, as street drugs, as the drugs that were declared war upon back in the 60s and 70s by the Nixon administration, if they're the hippie drugs, that's one conversation to have. I do feel like broadly popular perception is starting to shift on that front. I think that a lot of people have seen at least a couple of articles or pieces in the news about psychedelics kind of making this comeback in the second age of psychedelic research. But for people who have maybe not seen any of that news or have not let it sink in, I would say this isn't mysticism, this isn't unfounded science. We do have quite an excellent body of research to support both the safety and efficacy of these substances. And so we're actually going to be leading off the first portion of the conference to kind of address these sorts of concerns in our audience by sharing the perspectives of several of our preeminent scientists here at Penn, at Columbia, talking about what we know about the basic science of these molecules. We know how it works, we know why it's effective, and then bringing in a lot of our clinicians, especially in the Philadelphia area, talking about the benefits that they have seen, the excellent clinical outcomes that they have observed, what steps need to be taken, and the positive outcomes that come along with that conscientious focus on keeping people safe.
When you say these molecules and psychedelics, I feel like psychedelics can be considered an umbrella term. What exactly are we talking about here?
That is an excellent question. Psychedelics has different connotations for different people. There's some people who say psychedelics to mean any substance that changes how you perceive the world. There's some people who use psychedelics in the term of substances that are partial to full agonists of the serotonin HT2A receptor. I think that for most people and for most scientists, when they use the term psychedelics, what they're talking about more is something along the lines of substances that cause this kind of transcendental visual experience and that have some degree of identifiable activity at some of the major receptor systems. There's a blend of the subjective, there's a little bit of the objective neurobiology that comes in there. At this conference specifically, that's an easier question. We're going to be talking about ketamine and esketamine, which are usually more considered dissociative anesthetics, but on the neurobiology side have a very similar mechanism of action to how LSD, psilocybin, MDMA, what people would consider more of the conventional psychedelics, they work in a similar way. We're also going to be talking about psilocybin. We're also going to be talking about ibogaine, which acts on a different set of receptors than psilocybin, MDMA, LSD, but seems to have very similar subjective and neural effects.
So you're a fourth-year medical student. Can you tell me, either from what you've seen from doing clinical rotations, is it more or less beneficial to be using psychedelics that are, I guess we can say, in the ketamine realm of like dissociatives, or the other realms that include tryptamines like psilocybin, phenethylamines like MDMA, LSD, which I believe is their own thing. I butchered the name, lysergamide, I think that's the name for it. Is there any kind of scientific data that we have right now to show that, hey, ketamine is actually just as effective as psilocybin, or are we not there yet? What do we actually know about how effective one could be versus another?
The best data that we have suggests that in as much as each of those substances all lumped in together, they do tend to have similar degrees of efficacy, but less so for ketamine, esketamine, more so for MDMA, LSD, and probably the most for ibogaine. Now, I do want to condition this by saying that that's informed by just the science that I have read. In my clinical training, Penn Psychiatry is just barely starting to get into the esketamine side of things. No one at Penn is using ketamine as a treatment for treatment-resistant depression, although we are very lucky at Penn to have Michael Thace, the preeminent esketamine researcher who did a ton of work to actually bring esketamine into approval for treatment-resistant depression, as one of our head attending psychiatrists. That being said, even without seeing these substances in action in a clinical or academic context, the papers that we have, the trials that have been run, seem fairly unambiguous that there is a lot of potential in ketamine and esketamine. Ketamine is currently very broadly used for off-label for treatment of depression, PTSD. Esketamine by Janssen is, under the name Spravato, is approved for treatment of treatment-resistant depression. It acts very rapidly. Patients tend to have really excellent outcomes. But then the effect size for psilocybin, MDMA, LSD seems to be quite a bit more substantive than that. So we can get a sense of scale, right? We're getting a little technical, but I think putting things in context is always helpful. The effect size on treatment-resistant depression for esketamine and ketamine is about 0.4 across many different studies. That's similar to SSRIs, the first-line treatment for depression. They act a little bit faster, right? So it's helpful from that side of things. For psilocybin, MDMA, there's some people have concerns about how we're recording data from different studies. There's always concern about blinding. There's concern about expectation effects. But overall, it seems like the effect size for those substances is in the area of like 0.7 to 0.8. So I don't want to say like quite double the effectiveness, but could be seen seen is about double the effectiveness. And then for ibogaine, the effect size, we have less data for ibogaine, but it seems like the effect size is even larger, and it's particularly effective for opioid use disorder, which is something that ketamine, S-ketamine, psilocybin, MDMA, LSD can help with, but they don't seem to be a one and done type of thing that ibogaine is in up to 80% of patients.
I definitely want to talk more about ibogaine because I spoke to a facilitator who said that according to her patients, it was literally as though they were speaking to their ancestors. They were warped into a completely different time. It sounds like an absolutely absurd compound, but I am curious to know, before we get too far into it, what about this field of study is of particular interest to you? And also maybe just Penn in general. Why spend so much time trying to understand more about something that can be just as easily achieved, as you kind of put it, with an SSRI? If ketamine has the same more or less effects as an SSRI, then why look into it more? Why look into psilocybin?
Biggest reason I would say is twofold. First, these treatments work a lot faster. And when you're trying to help patients who are deeply suffering and at the most risk of the really worst consequences of any particular mental disorder, you want change quickly. You want them to get the help that they need fast. The other side of things is that they do tend to be even more effective than SSRIs just out of the gate. And any additional treatment that works in a different way provides one extra route that you can pursue if patients don't respond to the first couple of lines of treatment. Talking about the general way in which we treat patients right now. Someone comes into the clinic with depression. The first thing we're going to do, almost always, because SSRIs don't tend to have a lot of negative side effects, we would start them on an SSRI. We would try to pair them with an excellent therapist. Generally, if you have excellent therapy and an SSRI, about 40% of patients will respond to treatment, by which I mean they will no longer meet criteria for major depressive disorder after 6 weeks. Now, the question then comes, okay, so what do we do for that other 60% of patients? At that point, we can switch to a different SSRI. We can switch, and about 30% of patients will respond to that. We can switch to a completely different type of drug. We can switch to a selective norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. We can switch to bupropion, which has some dopamine reuptake inhibition tendencies as well. We can try some neuromodulation, transcranial magnetic stimulation, which I find particularly appealing and which I want to continue to research throughout the course of my career, is often an excellent second, third line option for patients. But all of those therapies, they all take at least 4 weeks to really start to have an effect. Even TMS, even though we consider that a rapid acting therapy, it's usually a week or two before patients really start to feel the full effect. And so from both the perspective of there still being like 30 to 40% of patients who, after going through all those different treatments, will still be depressed, plus the fact that they're now having to have gone through, months and months of different treatment options before they can even get to that point. Well, it would be so much better if we had something that we could give right away, that would work quickly, or even something that we could offer after they had gone through those other possibilities. And that's where ketamine, S-ketamine really come into play. They work fast, even though they're only effect size of 0.4, only treat 40-50% of patients who are treatment naive. It's an excellent option. And then you think about psychedelics, you think about LSD, psilocybin, MDMA, and of the myriad other analogous drugs that are currently in development. Now we have something that works even better than almost any other treatment for depression right away, and it works in the course of a couple of hours. The effect continues to be modulated over the next couple of weeks as patients start to integrate their experience, as they can hopefully work with a therapist to consolidate everything they've experienced, but it works fast.
I like the fact that it works fast, and I like the fact that it feels so noble in nature. Can I play devil's advocate for a second?
Of course.
So for someone who's a bit more of the, I'm not sure I fully buy this because it sounds too good to be true, how can you actually sustain the noble intention behind what it is that you just said if it feels like it's too good to be true. Because so often we're told, oh yeah, this pill is going to help you. Oh yeah, this treatment's going to help you. Oh, this is the newest and improvest whatever therapy that you can have to improve everything about yourself. It's why we have so many apps for our mental health care. It's why we have so many so-called professionals and facilitators leading all these different missions. How are we going to actually make sure that if Big Pharma, for example, wants to get a hold of this, if different industries want to start dipping their toes in the waters, how can we ensure that the noble effort that you just said right now, that's going to stay continuous throughout this kind of treatment, this therapy?
It's a great question. I often say to people who ask why I feel so passionate about mental health care that among the many reasons I have as far as seeing the incredible differences that it makes in patients' lives and feeling like being able to work with people on their own subjective state of being is deeply, deeply meaningful, I say that psychiatry right now is where cancer biology, let's say oncology, and infectious disease was like 80 to 90 years ago. By which I mean, we were working with such blunt instruments to treat cancer, 80 years ago. We discovered that chemotherapy was a thing that you could do for cancer after watching as soldiers in World War II who stumbled into mustard gas got spontaneous remission of their tumors and liquid oncology pathologies. So over the course of those next 80 years, 100 years, now we've gotten to a point where I spent a summer in a really incredible multiple myeloma clinic where multiple myeloma has gone from a death sentence, for instance, to now being just kind of another chronic condition that people live with. I mean, here at Penn, we're very proud of our CAR T-cell therapy. Patients can get CAR T-cell therapy for multiple myeloma and mostly just fixes it. It seems too good to be true, but sometimes you do stumble upon magic bullets. But even saying it like that, right? We didn't stumble on a magic bullet. Over 100 years of understanding what was actually going on with cancer and with multiple myeloma, specifically in this instance, we got to a place where we were able to treat it definitively. So same thing with infectious disease, right? Time was, if you got merely a flesh wound and it happened to get some random nasty bacteria in it, that could very well kill you. And then we discovered penicillin, and that was incredible. And then we've continued to find myriad ways to fight all of the little critters that want to take residence in our bodies and eat us from the inside. And vaccines, incredible. 5th generation antibiotics, they work so incredibly well. I think that right now we really are getting to the place where, I would be so far off the mark to say that we're understanding in any real way how the mind and brain actually work, but we are coming to a place where we are starting to gather an arsenal of treatments that work really exceptionally well for mental illness, analogous to how we were able to find those therapies, again, 100 years ago with penicillin and mustard gas. So all that being said, I do want to acknowledge a deeper point, if I may, which is we also have to be really careful to not oversell the potential here. I think that a big reason that people got burned on psychedelics back in the 70s is because many people made really over the moon promises about how this is not only going to cure mental illness, but how it was also going to completely reshape our experience of reality, our ability to connect with other people. The fact of the matter is, these drugs are also quite limited. There's other therapies that we have that have even greater effect sizes. If I had my way, I would say, let's make electroconvulsive therapy one of the first line treatments for depression because it's so much more effective than anything else that exists. It's probably not going to happen because it's still very stigmatized, but it is incredibly effective. And so I think the really important thing for all of us to keep in mind is nothing ever is going to be a one size fits all. But with that caveat, there are some treatments that are hugely beneficial, maybe not for everybody, but they will really change the landscape as far as what treatments we provide.
You made a couple of interesting points that I want to circle back on. I hope that I get all of them. The first one, it is very true. To use a word like magic bullet, that is something that I think a lot of people go into it with the misconception of, this is going to be a magic bullet, this is going to help me, this is going to save me. And then to the point that you also said, it's not just about that. You have to do the consolidation session after, you have to do the integration session after. So then to play this kind of devil's advocate of someone who's maybe still skeptical, what then is different about a consolidation and integrative session if I didn't take psychedelics? Why can't you just ask me those same really powerful questions. What about these compounds in particular is changing the way that our brains think that actually make it transformative? Why can't I just take my SSRI and then do the same integrative consolidation?
Because all of these substances, and this is how I kind of this is why I feel compelled to lump a lot of them into somewhat the same category. All of these substances do seemingly open up new pathways in our brain that lead in the same direction towards being able to reconnect with other people, to experience the world differently. And those changes in our brain wiring seem to be very consistent across people, across each of these different drug classes. So it's a large claim, needs to be supported by large evidence. One of my very favorite papers, and some people take issue with this paper, some people don't. I think that it's a beautifully done example of basic science in action. Nardo et al., 2023. The name of the paper is Psychedelics Reopen the Social Reward Learning Critical Period, and this was done in Goldolan's very prestigious laboratory. They've been a large name in the psychedelic space for decades. The way the study was structured is they took a bunch of neurons and they put them in vats and they exposed them to a bunch of different substances. Some were psychedelic, some were ketamine and esketamine, some were not psychedelic, but definitely psychoactive. Think cocaine, think amphetamines. And they measured what changed about the types of proteins that each of these neurons were expressing. Now, I'll have to get a little bit into the cell biology here, so I hope your audience will forgive me. But what they looked at specifically was they looked at all the surface proteins that were either up or down regulated after exposing each of these cells to these different substances. And when you have two neurons wired together, if you have one neuron talking to another neuron, sometimes we depict that as kind of like a little presynaptic cup reaching out and synapsing onto another little cup right here. And we say, okay, the presynaptic one's going to be firing off some dopamine into the cleft, and then the postsynaptic neuron's going to be gobbling up that dopamine, and that'll be activating the postsynaptic neuron in some way. So that does describe what happens between neurons. But what those illustrations commonly miss is that it's not just two suction cups floating about in a vacuum. In order for those synapses to stay in contact, you have to have some pretty intense structure, some scaffolding keeping them there. And so there's this whole family of different proteins that build up and connect each side of the pre and postsynaptic neuron to each other. Synapse refers to the coupling of pre and post, but together that synapse is formed not just by the neurons, but also all the proteins that link them. And this makes sense, right? Because if you didn't have that very tight bond from the proteins, every time you moved your head about, you'd be flopping your synapses all over back and forth, and we couldn't have that. So coming back to this paper, what they found was ketamine and esketamine and psilocybin and LSD and MDMA and ibogaine all switched on a very particular pathway of proteins that were expressed, proteins that bound those synapses tightly together, but mostly for synapses within this social reward learning pathway. And so what they say, the title of the paper, Social Reward Learning Critical Period, the critical period in neurology is the time when a brain circuit is primed most to learn and integrate and reshape itself. We often talk about the vision critical period in children, where if you were to cover a child's eye from the age of like 1 to 2, that's their visual critical period. If their eye's covered, they don't receive any visual stimulus to that eye during that time, they will never be able to gain vision back, because the neurons responsible for interpreting the signals to the eye, even a perfectly healthy eye, they don't ever get the chance to develop again. So what's implied by this paper is, if we take these substances, we reopen this critical period. If we hypothesize that this critical period is what is driving all these subjective changes in people's lives and how they feel, okay, you're locked into a particular way of perceiving the social environment, of gaining social reward, of being able to feel joy and reward and empathy towards and from the people around you. But if that never develops, you're just kind of stuck there, right? Like you can kind of overcome that a little bit, maybe with SSRIs that have low-key similar effects. Cocaine and amphetamines don't really change it for you that much. But all the other drugs that we mentioned do. They really do rewire your brain by allowing you another shot at perceiving your social world the way that all of us are kind of meant to.
There's a couple of things to unpack with that. The way that we're all kind of meant to. Is there some sort of standard norm for how we all should be perceiving society? And is the hypothesis basically that whichever way that we perceive the world because of taking these substances is actually the de facto truth, and anything else is just our subjective experience based on our culture, subculture, environmental status, all this kind of things? And then if this is such a powerful thing that you can see the world differently, you see how it's supposed to be seen, because also you're not the first one to say that. In, I think it's called The Doors of Perception by Aldous Huxley, he mentioned that when he was on mescaline, he quoted, "This is how the world ought to be seen." So is there some sort of standard, okay, this is exactly how the world is supposed to be seen, and everything else from our religion, race, ethnicity, whatever, is that taking us away from that? And then if that is the case, well then why is this dangerous for some people and not for other people? Why wouldn't this just be, if we're looking at the chemicals, if we're looking at our neurons, why can't we all take this and be okay?
You'll have to ask me the second one again in a moment. We'll have to come back to the particular dangers to particular people. For the first part, I mean, I love talking about this kind of stuff. How deep do you want to get? Like, we can get pretty philosophically deep.
I want to get as deep as you're able to say within reason that you can substantiate with evidence, because there is definitely something to this idea of how the world ought to be seen that I think, coming from someone who's had your background both in the field, like literally helping out patients, and also being a human yourself, experiencing the world, having your own biases, your own cognitive distortions, unlearning them, learning new ones, just learning about how we function. Is there something to, there is one sort of reality that we all should be sort of perceiving, and all of our subjective realities, that's nothing more than just our egos at play? Like, oh, I think I'm so special, I'm so important, I'm gonna see this world this way, and everything else, there's no one real way?
In a totally objective sense, but I'll say in a moment why I don't like the idea of objective. In a totally objective sense, there is no should, there is no this is the way that things ought to be perceived or viewed, because in as literal of a sense as we can get, if I were to hold this up, just by saying hold and this and up and implying that there are edges to this object and that there's an object here at all that imparts value and implies value that comes with me into how I perceive this object. The fact of the matter is, we think that we live in a world of objective reality, and then we have like some degree of subjective interpretation. The fact of the matter is, we live in a universe that's composed of like tiny fluctuations and little bits of math that move orthogonally to each other in weird ways. That's the literal truth of the universe. But it's not very helpful to look around and be like, wow, is this a table? Or is it just like a weird cluster of electrons and protons and neutrons all bound together by little odd quarks? That's not how we think, right? So everything that we talk about and think about is a value judgment inherently. I think all of us kind of recognize that on some level, so it's not very helpful for me to say that. I think the deeper question, if I may, what you're saying is, okay, so when we're talking about what we should and should not be experiencing, what role we should and should not have in society, or how we should or should not perceive our role in society, where does that should come from? And if we're trying to treat patients in order to readjust their perception of those social roles, of themselves, well, who are we to say we should realign your perceptions in this particular direction? So when I say give people another chance to rewire their brain network in the direction that it should have grown towards all along, I'm not talking in the gospel according to T. Peterson Wagner. I'm talking according to the way that most people's brains would have developed had they been given statistically normal life circumstances. And this also becomes tricky, right? And it's a challenge at the core of mental health and psychiatry, especially right now, is we in psychiatry define mental illness based on to what degree someone's mental state or behaviors are causing subjective distress or subjective friction within society. And so you can see inherent in that, there's a value judgment that comes out of whatever environment a patient may find themselves in. Now, when we talk about some mental illnesses, there's some things, I wonder if this might not even be a part of the border between neurology and psychiatry. In neurology, if someone has seizures, if you let those seizures go on without being treated, that will cause them physical harm at some point without there being any interface with society. If someone has depression, I would say that a major depressive disorder, even without any interaction with society, if patients feel like deeply suicidal, that will harm them outside of any influences from society. But if we're talking about something like autism or ADHD or opioid use disorder even, I mean, that one's a little bit more controversial, but those challenges are mostly determined by how difficult it makes for a patient living within their particular social context. And so we have two options, right? Do we reshape our society in a way that would maximally reduce the pressures and difficulties that these patients face? And I think that there's some things we could do, like accommodations and across a lot of different domains, totally reasonable. I think harm reduction plays into this in a big way. I mean, if someone can get a predictable and safe dose of opioids daily, then there's really nothing that would inhibit them from living their life just as anyone else in any particular society would. So there's a great degree of stigma that influences how we judge someone to be suffering from a particular use disorder, right? We wouldn't say that me with my medication, I have a whatever medication use disorder because, I take the same amount and a particular dosage each day, but I am dependent on it, right? Like I'll withdraw if I go off of it, but we perceive it a little bit differently. All that being said, I think that in the broadest possible sense, and what's really important to keep in mind as we're talking about psychedelics and how they can change people to what they should or shouldn't be, we have to always be aware that we're talking about that in a context where we're assuming that we're treating people's illnesses as defined by the DSM-5, where the diagnostic criteria is, for any illness, subjective distress, not able to appropriately function in society.
It does bring me then back to the question of, okay, so if I have someone who is major depressive disorder, and then I have someone who is schizophrenic, and then I have someone who is bipolar, these are all affecting their ability to not only interact with society, but perceive it just generally speaking. So why would it be okay for one group of person, as we're saying as the main example, depression, why would that be okay for this individual to then undergo psychedelic therapy? But it's been historically known that if you're taking anything and you're schizophrenic, bipolar, have any of these kinds of personality disorders, it's probably not the best idea.
It depends. It would depend less on our perception of the degree to which these patients are being inhibited or distressed by their disease, and more so, I would say almost more the chemical interactions with whatever their disease process is. And we say that, okay, we feel
to quickly interject, can I ask really quickly? Please. I'm so sorry.
No,
when you say the chemical process for each of these diseases, is there a different chemical process, like for schizophrenic patient type A and schizophrenic patient type B?
Yes, at a couple of different levels, right? So you can have patients, I mean, of course, every patient necessarily has a different disease process because everyone's brain is different. I think a little bit more broadly, there are even different phenotypes of psychotic illness. Like you can have plain run-of-the-mill, very disabling schizophrenia versus something like schizoaffective disorder, which looks a little bit like bipolar disorder and schizophrenia had a baby. That I would say that you'd be, and I haven't seen any papers to specifically look at schizoaffective disorder for psychedelics. I would imagine it would be a lot riskier for the schizoaffective patients to take psychedelics than it would be for the schizophrenia patients to take psychedelics. As far as particular phenotypes of schizophrenia that might be more predisposed towards having a very negative outcome with psychedelics, I haven't seen any of those papers, although I'd be very curious to see if any research has been done there. I will say that we seem to be coming around as a field to the idea that psychedelics are probably not as dangerous as we've suspected for schizophrenia.
Interesting.
Yeah, interesting, right?
Almost every single facilitator that I've spoken to, and also every retreat center that I've ever spoken to, has said that when they go through their screenings, they will immediately cast out anyone that says that they have, or in their family there's a history of schizophrenia. Same thing with bipolar.
The caution around bipolar is probably quite justified, for the reason being that, and you see this a lot with SSRIs too, and amphetamines and selective norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors. I'm not sure about that one, but definitely SSRIs and dopaminergic agents. When you take those as someone with bipolar disorder, particularly bipolar 1, it can very often cause we call it a switch, flip people over from being euthymic, having a normal mood, or into being manic, right? Florid mania is a very dangerous condition. It's one of the highest morbidity states that people can be in across all of medicine. It's very dangerous. From that perspective, taking psychedelics, which have a similar mechanism of action to dopaminergic or serotonergic agents like SSRIs, I think we can still be quite confident that if you have bipolar type 1 and quite likely bipolar type 2, you should avoid those. Now, with schizophrenia, most facilitators are quite cautious, and reasonably so, about giving people with schizophrenia psychedelic substances because there's been a concern for a long time that psychedelic experiences and schizophrenia have a lot in common. And if you were to give someone with a predisposition for schizophrenia psychedelics, you could cause them to slip into florid psychosis, even like cause them to develop schizophrenia in a way that they would not have had they not been exposed to psychedelics.
But couldn't you also play devil's advocate and say that, well, you just said that when you take psychedelics, it basically increases the scaffolding that connect these neural synapses together. So then if I am schizophrenic, for lack of better words, and I am seeing things that aren't there and I'm hearing things that aren't there, maybe it's because of whatever, and I actually need these things to bind better because for whatever reason I need that. Couldn't that help me? If all of our brains are different, then how do you know that it wouldn't help me and you're lumping me together with the other people that it would actually hurt, but it could help me?
I think that the field as a whole is coming around to that possibility. I saw a presentation at the last Philadelic that was a pretty large survey of patients who had schizophrenia and had taken psychedelics. And across many, many patients, I think it was in the hundreds, none of them had experienced any flip into psychosis or experienced any worsening of symptoms, or with subjects who had first or second degree relatives with schizophrenia, none of them had precipitated new schizophrenia. And that was quite surprising because most people thought that this was, I wouldn't say quite inevitable, but the possibility of that happening was quite high. No one really wants to be going out there giving psychedelics to schizophrenic patients because, again, that's dangerous. But I would hope that as we become more open to that possibility, and as psychedelics become less regulated and we have more opportunity for doing that kind of research, I think there is a lot of room for further research in that area.
Everything that we're talking about here, just to kind of wrap my head around it, is this what would be going on within the Philadelic Forum, or is this kind of our own side tangent? Like when you guys get into the specifics of what you talk about during these different forums, during these different sessions, is there a kind of way that you want to structure the flow in which these topics are hit upon? Or is it like, okay, we're only going to be focusing on policies this time around?
Well, this time around, mostly policy. But this time around is a little bit of a break from the usual flow of Philadelic. Philadelic, the last couple of years, in the same way that we hope to structure it in 2026 and beyond, it's supposed to be maximally transdisciplinary, right? So we do want to cover the entire arc, from all the way from like the metaphysical to the ethical and the legal. The things that we've been talking about is, hey, how do we actually define illness? Do we only want to treat people who we think are ill by whatever our Western medical model standard is? Do we want to have more of a harm reduction approach? Do we want more of a traditional healing approach? Would that help people better connect with themselves, have better outcomes? All the way to things like, what can we gain from psychedelics as far as like probing the structure of our consciousness, probing how we actually develop our sense of self and identities, to things like, hey, how does this interact with economics and health economics? What can we do about treating patients at scale? And so ideally, we would be talking about all of this, from the basic science, the translational, the clinical, to the social sciences, policy stuff, everything.
What are the policies in particular that you guys will be focusing on this time around? Are we able to talk about any of them right now that you think, hey, this is a thing that not a lot of people know about that you definitely should know about?
Totally confidential. Can't possibly disclose. No, of course. Yeah, let's get into it. So the things we're going to be talking about this time, first and foremost, we want to paint a picture that even though there's so many regulatory barriers at a federal and a state and a local and an institutional level to providing patients with psychedelic treatment and with doing the research that we need in order to like actually get these substances to the people who need them, even with all of that, we still have other challenges. We have solutions to those challenges. We've got ways to still get people the help they need, and we've got a couple of different ways that we can go from here in order to start moving towards a better, more comprehensive therapeutic future. So we're going to be talking about the current models of treating patients as they exist. We're going to be talking about some really fascinating work that we're doing here and nearby universities. So talking about psilocybin to treat opioid use disorder. Anne Rose Childress and Paul Regier here at Penn are doing that study right now. Obviously, Michael Thace will be talking about esketamine, ketamine, and what we learned from them about how to research psychedelics. We're going to be talking about the challenges in safely and effectively giving patients these substances, the regulatory barriers, the coverage barriers, the scale barriers that our clinicians have faced, the models for how Oregon and Colorado and Mexico and Brazil operate, and the challenges that they still face despite having a more permissive model in each of those areas. Things that we can learn about getting other Schedule I substances more broadly open for people to use. So talking about what we can learn about marijuana and decriminalizing it in New Jersey and other states. And then talking about, hey, once we actually have a chance to provide people with these things, how can we partner with insurance companies? How can we partner with pharma companies? How can we partner with our cities and states to help as many people as possible access this affordably? Because I think that's another big concern that a lot of people have, is that psychedelics are going to become kind of a luxury or concierge treatment. That's not the way that we're really going to be able to make a difference in mental health care. We have to be able to provide everyone who needs it with what they need.
We've heard that one before, though. How can we actually ensure that it doesn't happen where it's another luxury thing that is supposed to be for the people, but then you look at the price tag?
So it's hard. Right? It is hard because it's really interesting thinking about what happened with ketamine and esketamine. Fascinating case study in the constraints of our healthcare system in the US and our insurance models. So ketamine, not scheduled, not FDA approved for anything aside from anesthesia. Now, we began finding that ketamine was really effective for treating treatment-resistant depression. So patients began paying hundreds to thousands of dollars for IV ketamine treatments off-label. Now, their insurance wouldn't reimburse them because it was not FDA approved for depression, and that sucked, but it was available for the people who were willing to shell out, right? Okay, so that was all very well and good, but it kind of became a luxury thing. So here comes Janssen, and they say, hey, what if we take ketamine and we get it FDA approved for depression? And they said, fine, we can do that, but these clinical trials are very, very expensive. The FDA has really exacting standards that it holds its pharma partners to when they're developing drugs, for better or for worse. And so in order to get the drug approved, in order to fund these very expensive trials, what they did is they, instead of trying to get ketamine approved, so they took a racemic enantiomer of ketamine, which is basically still just ketamine, but it's basically still just ketamine. It's chemically identical. And
it's a fancy name.
It's a fancy name. So they took fancy S-ketamine instead of boring old ketamine, and they ran it through all of the clinical trials, and they found, hey, surprise, surprise, it's also just as effective at treating depression as ketamine is. And so then they got FDA approval for S-ketamine, and because they got approval for S-ketamine from the FDA, that means now insurance companies will cover the cost of S-ketamine for patients. So here's the tricky part, right? For patients, it's often much more affordable to get S-ketamine, but it's a lot less economic at scale because providers and Janssen can charge whatever they want for S-ketamine because the insurance companies will pay for it. And so that means now a lot more people can get S-ketamine, but we haven't really seen any of the economic benefits of being able to effectively and cheaply treat treatment-resistant depression at scale. So we can have to pursue a couple of different routes, right? we have to not only partner with the insurance companies to make sure that we will be able to provide as benefits any psychedelic therapy that patients would benefit from. We also have to be working very closely with drug companies to be able to bring down the prices that they have to pay to get these drugs approved, so they don't have to be charging so much on the back end in order to get these drugs to market. We have to be working with them even to, ideally it would be to work with the FDA to bring down the cost of doing these trials in the first place. We have to partner with public institutions to be able to get them to see the benefits of providing ibogaine, for instance, to treat opioid use disorder, showing them that the overall benefits of having a one and done solution for opioid use disorder is so much more economical than having to deal with the continuing challenges of all the challenges of opioid use disorder day after day. So from all those perspectives.
Yeah, but just really quickly for clarity's sake, what is, in a nutshell, the difference between esketamine and ketamine?
That's a hard thing to say in a nutshell. Basically, if you think about each molecule that exists, doesn't match perfectly onto a mirror image of itself. It has a particular sort of, we call it a stereochemistry, but basically it's like the difference between your right hand and your left hand, right? Ketamine is an equal blend of right hand and left hand. S-ketamine is just the S in enantiomer. That's it, same thing.
Alrighty. Is there anything in particular about Philadelic that we didn't get into here that you would have wanted to?
I think that's it. I think we're doing a little bit more of a tactical focus this time. We are passionate about showcasing the transdisciplinary potential of psychedelics across every single field. If anyone listening to this wants to know more about the metaphysics, the basic science, the translational stuff, to the economic stuff, please go to our website, philadelic.org. Take a look at everyone who's spoken in 2024 and 2023. We had some really phenomenal speakers, and I'm referencing mostly their work in a really big way as we talk here.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to actually elaborate on all of this. As we go, is there anything in particular that you would warn against or say that you are personally, I wouldn't say scared, but skeptical of as we make these kind of drugs, these compounds more mainstream?
I would say with any drug, do your research beforehand. Ideally, work with a professional. If you have bipolar 1, that would be a pretty hard contraindication, I would say. But also look at what SSRIs might change about the intensity of your experience, benzodiazepines, alcohol. Dear God, please don't take mushrooms if you're on a MAOI. But the information is out there. Any good practitioner should be able to talk you through your risks from your background and risks from other drugs that you're taking, and be safe. Come into it with a good set, do it in a good setting, know what you're getting into before getting into it.
I like that. We'll end on that note. Thank you very much for your time today, Peterson.
Thank you, Danny.
This has been the Micah Mind podcast. If today's conversation gave you something to think about, consider sharing it with someone who's exploring their own mind and body. Subscribe for more episodes, and check out the bio for research links and updates on Micah Mind as we continue our discoveries. I'm Danielle Grobman. Thanks for listening, and until next time, safe travels.
Deeper you go, the further you flow, the more that you know.